So we were talking about how we can improve software, the impact of software. I can give you a very, very short presentation here. It was pointed out that the way that the ref will actually judge the quality of software, the impact of software, is through case studies. So that's it, thank you, good night. But we did actually delve a little bit deeper than that. We didn't do any further work, unfortunately. That's a problem, I can't read that. That I definitely can't read. So again, we delved into that a little bit more detail. So case studies, we thought a bit about what the nature of those case studies should be, how we could actually put them together, the quality of the case studies, how you could actually look for case studies that were actually decent case studies. Somebody pointed out if you had a case study that said, you know, we did some software and that led to a paper in Nature. You know, we didn't write the paper in Nature, but the people who wrote the paper in Nature really used our software to get there. Then that was obviously a very big impact piece of software. But alternatively, you could have a piece of software that doesn't have a major impact on anything, but thousands of people end up using it. We got into a bit of a sort of story along that line, in the sense that eventually you get to the point where you've got a certain piece of software which is so intrinsically simple but very, very important that everybody ends up using it and nobody thinks to cite it. You wouldn't ever think of writing down on a paper publication, I would like to thank the authors of LaTeX for developing their software, or I'd like to thank Microsoft for writing Word, or something like that. One of the things that was pointed out was if you can actually write a paper and get it published early on, sometimes you have to publish it in a quite lowbrow publication source, but if it gets something out there into the community so that people can actually reference it, you know, you may not be able to actually provide a highbrow journal publication which just talks about your software, but a lowbrow conference paper that just talks about this is our software, that people can actually reference. And you often find that some very, very highly referenced papers are very, very lowbrow papers that are actually talking in detail about a particular piece of software that people use a lot. The quality of the software is domain and discipline specific, so it's the usability, the quality of the software, what it's actually used for, what you can actually do with it, its usefulness for the community. I can't quite remember at the moment what poorly engineered software used in multiple domains quite means, but I think it was something along the lines of you could have a piece of software that was very, very good for one domain, or you could write some software that perhaps wasn't as good but was used in lots of different domains, so again could have better impact. There's some comments on the software effectiveness depends on the data set. So if you've got a really important data set, the actual software that you use for that data set could be very important and could be very, very useful. So again, your software could have high impact, not because necessarily the software, but because the data is so important. Going back to sort of the idea of the refs, the importance of that software depends on which panel it's going to go in front of. So perhaps if you've got a piece of software that's going in front of a panel that's talking about bioinformatics or physics, it may not be viewed as a very significant thing. If it goes up in front of a computer science panel, it might be seen as the best thing since sliced bread. Software is as a pioneering prototype. So again, if you're the first to market with a particular piece of software, so if you're the first person to implement a particular standard or the first person to achieve a particular thing, again, if you can get it out there, lots of times people have to reference your software because they're trying to show that theirs is better than yours or whatever. Again, that gets you notoriety, it gets you out there into the community. Then, coming back to a previous point, which is very, very basic, simple software that's very, very useful, often ends up being missed because people don't consider it as significant enough to sort of talk about. Again, you know, you don't talk about the intrinsic software like, you know, the operating system that you use when you're doing your experiments and things like that, the compiler, things like that. Are we interested in the quality impact of our software? Oh, so yeah, so again, we talked about this first of all in terms of how it could actually improve what would happen for a ref. What we now will start to think about was, are we actually interested in that ourselves? And we kind of decided yes we were, for sort of the sort of things of, if we're actually developing software, how can we tell which features are actually being used the most? How can we tell what people are actually liking about our software, what they really want to do with it in the future? We then started to talk about the idea of how we could actually collect that information. And the question was asked, has anybody tried the idea of the splash screen that you get when you install any sort of Microsoft or commercial piece of software that says, we would like to collect information about how you use our software so that we can actually improve things in the future. And we got some interesting feedback on that. Some people talking about Globus said that didn't go down quite well in Europe, but it actually go down quite well in America. They got some really good feedback from America. Taverna guys again said they've had some quite good feedback. And it was sort of an idea is there as well, is that if people like you and like your software, they're more likely to trust you to sort of put that sort of thing into your software. If they don't think you're a particularly good person, they might not be actually that way inclined. Contact by users. So again, sort of through your help system, if somebody actually comes to you and talks about, I tried your software, it didn't quite work, it's showing that there's a certain level of interest there, because lots of people download software, and if their first impression of that software is it's absolutely pants, you won't actually go and bother contacting a help support service and saying, look, your software is pants. You'll just delete it off your computer and ignore it. Well, at least if they've actually got in touch with you, they must see some value in your software. And then it was also pointed out that if you go to the next step, so that they've contacted you, you've given them help, and then they come back to you a second time, or a third or a fourth time, that's again showing quite a lot of interest in your software, because it shows that they're actually using it and they value it enough to try and get somewhere with it. So then a little bit of talk about sort of the usage of software after the project's finished, so you can record things like the number of downloads, how many people download and perhaps register the software. If you can collect things like quotations from users, so users come along, they use your software, if they like it, if they don't like it, you probably don't want to collect their quotations, but if they like your software, collect those quotations, keep them, they can be used to sort of evidence. And again, pointers for publications. So I think somebody else was talking about trying to do something like a DOI on software. Again, if we can do something like that, or if you can get a paper actually out there, we can actually sort of get references and a formal way of recording that the software is used.